You know that David versus Goliath fairy tale? A classic for sure. But is there truth to it? From my experience the past few weeks and months here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I have to say the answer is yes. And I'm not talking about magic. I'm talking about real human beings with the relative size and strength of David facing down a relative giant and winning. The battle was harrowing, but looking back now, in some ways, it almost seems inevitable who won. Funny how that happens. Today's episode is basically me telling you this story in 4 chapters. So grab a warm drink, cozy up somewhere comfortable, and listen in. I can't wait to tell you this story. I can't wait for you to hear it. And I am so looking forward to hearing your thoughts after you do. Welcome back, dear ones. I've missed you.
Welcome to the For the Love of Humanity podcast, a place for those who'd like to see philanthropy be less of the industry it has become and return to its roots, love of humanity. This place is beautiful and hopeful, and it's nothing without you. Community is the way. Community has always been the way, and philanthropy has lost its way as it's developed over the years. We are re-centering community at For the Love of Humanity, and community is what we seek in everything we do. Friends, to love and care for our fellow human beings is one of the most human things we can do. Let's get back to the roots of what it means to be human. Let's return to true philanthropy together.
Hey, friends. It has been a minute and then some. We've had a bit of a break here. I purposely haven't structured this podcast so that it has seasons. I don't really have any reason to structure it in seasons, but there are occasionally little breaks. And of course, we were meant to have a break at the end of 2025. And we were supposed to be back in business here on the podcast right in the middle of January. But for those of you that have been paying attention to what has been happening here in Minnesota and in Minneapolis, my home state and city, you know that we have been going through it. It actually started late last year, and it just, at the beginning of this year, completely escalated. We're talking something like over 3,000 federal agents roaming our communities with guns, grabbing people literally off the streets. Maybe if they looked a little too brown or a little too immigrant. And then, as you may have heard too, also grabbing and harming many other people too. It was a very, very intense, traumatizing, violent beginning to the year. There has been a drawdown, but they're not gone. While there were over 3,000 by some counts earlier, now it's in the hundreds, but that still is far more than we're used to here. I've heard the figure for what is a normal amount of federal immigration agents here, about 150. So we still have more than usual, but it has stopped feeling quite so acute here. And I think a lot of us here are just trying to catch our breath, trying to catch up with ourselves, trying to figure out how we move forward, trying to figure out how we heal. And I think A lot of that discussion will probably be unfolding on the Substack in writing and also here on the podcast as I am living it. I am living it along with my community, all my communities here. And so I think, it'll continue to unfold. But while I wasn't podcasting over the first part of this year, I did keep up the writing. So every Friday, I continued to put out posts on the For the Love of Humanity Substack publication. And what I've decided to do for this first episode of 2026 is just to kind of catch you up on what's been happening. I'm pulling elements of some of those first posts of this year. I'm going to be sharing parts of them with you verbally. This helps me process some of what we've been through. It helps you, if you're not really very familiar with what's been happening, start to feel like you're caught up. There's also something I think pretty powerful about hearing me say these things with my voice, my actual voice, instead of seeing them in black and white on a screen. There are so many meaningful conversations and reflections here. I just want to be sure that this world-changing, intense, powerful experience that we've been having here has room to breathe and has a place to exist in the collection of these podcast episodes. I think it deserves that. And because it is such a huge, meaningful chapter, not only for our community, for our state, but also for our country and even for the world, because of how much the US affects the rest of the world, I want to do this. I want to share this here and let it live here, because that's one of the beauties of podcast episodes too. They really have a tendency to have legs and have durability, to have folks able to find them and listen to them and experience them years and years and years later. So I'm submitting this as part of the historical record, as it were, of what's been happening in Minnesota and in Minneapolis, Minnesota in particular, because that's where I am at the beginning of 2026. So the first post I'm going to share is something I published on January 16th, 2026. Here in Minneapolis, neighbor after friend after neighbor has voiced that it feels like we're under attack, that we're living in a war zone. When I wrote this to a friend checking in from Texas, he replied, "I imagine it feels that way because you are." I mean, pretty much. Just about 24 hours ago now, I felt a strong internal nudge to just bear witness to what's been happening here, to lay some of it out in a way that others, especially those who are not here, could see and understand what's happening here better than they probably were from watching or listening to news reports. Person after person here has said that their impression from talking to their people in other places is that no one who isn't here seems to really get how bad it actually is here. So I sat down and wrote out a few real life scenarios in my immediate world, just a very tiny sample of the many, many similar things that have been happening here over the past month and a half, but that have been aggressively proliferating since the beginning of this year. And I decided to put it on LinkedIn. Here's what I posted on LinkedIn. Friends, I'm here to bear witness to tell you what's happening on the ground here in Minneapolis. A fundraising colleague reported she had long guns pointed at her while she was in an area suburb. Last night, federal agents shot another of our neighbors, and as a family with 6 children tried to flee the aftermath, federal agents threw flashbangs and tear gas into the car. The subsequent explosion was so intense that the airbags deployed. All of the kids were injured, 3 sent to the hospital, and the 6-month-old reportedly stopped breathing and had to be revived. Friends and neighbors and loved ones, U.S. citizens all over the Twin Cities are no longer leaving their homes and thus rendering themselves dependent on brave others to supply their food and supplies. A brown-skinned neighbor was out walking in the early morning and had a man beckon to him from a dark, unmarked car and tell him to come over. He, of course, turned around and ran in the opposite direction. That car and another car chased him and cornered him. It turned out they were ICE. Thank goodness he had ID on him and he was let go. But so often folks on walks don't have ID, or even if they do, they may still be detained. Do not buy that it's illegal immigrants or criminals being targeted. Native Americans are being targeted. White retirees have been targeted. There are multiple stories of this. A young special ed teacher was detained on her way to work after ICE cars rammed into her and then lied, saying she had rammed them. A Minneapolis pastor was detained for a while until the agents told him he was white, so not fun enough. There is story after story of law-abiding citizens being detained. A colleague was a refugee decades ago from civil war in the former Yugoslavia. She wrote, "I've spent time in war zones before, places where fear hangs in the air and ordinary life is suddenly overtaken by violence and uncertainty. Minneapolis right now feels like that. We all feel like we're under siege here. If you're not here, we need a couple key things from you if you're willing to step up in solidarity with us. 1, share these stories. Start following the news out of Minnesota, the real on-the-ground reporting of citizens and journalists here. Then share and amplify these stories. We need the world to know what is actually happening here and not believe any of the copious propaganda out there. 2, get loud. Start speaking up to all of your elected officials. Inform your friends, family, neighbors, colleagues. Send emails. Make phone calls. Make clear that you will not accept this unconstitutional activity in Minnesota or anywhere else. Because guess what? If it's not stopped here, it's headed elsewhere soon. Remember, silence is not neutral. Each of us has a pretty clear choice right now. Keep silent and thus this continues, or speak up. What'll it be, friends? So that was the post on LinkedIn. What came next was something I never could have anticipated. When I first posted this post, I said there were over 66,000 impressions of the post on LinkedIn. By now, that's over 101,000 impressions. There had been nearly 3,000 reactions logged. By now, that's nearly 3,500. The post had been shared nearly 1,500 times. By now, that's well over 1,500 times. There had been over 300 comments, and by now that's almost 400. And get this, Baratunde Thurston, the Baratunde Thurston, not only shared the post, but he started following me, and it just keeps going. The thing about going viral, which some of you probably know, I've never experienced this before myself, is that you will never, ever be able to fully grasp how many people have engaged with your content, and you will never, ever be able to engage with everyone who did. As someone with a pretty small, hands-on, community-first audience usually, that's a bit hard for me. But I'm embracing the visibility because of what it means for our hopes for justice and peace. People all over the world responded. Reposts were in other languages. People in other countries were commenting on how much they knew this would affect them. Some commented on how much they had begged Americans to care about things going on in their neck of the woods and saw most Americans just ignoring them. So they were miffed that Americans expected solidarity now. I mean, fair. Others commented on ways they knew they had to guard against this sort of thing happening soon in their own countries. Of the literally thousands of responses, they were almost all supportive. People from all parts of the United States and Canada, to people in Europe and Asia, to people in Australia or Africa, were responding with compassion, care, concern, and solidarity. They responded almost exactly how I would have hoped. They saw how important it was for them to bear witness to, wherever they were. And they shared our on-the-ground realities here in Minnesota with their own communities and encouraged folks to get involved, to guard against this happening where they were, to raise awareness about what was happening here. Given that I'm not prone to hyperbole and always aim to present things as clearly and accurately as possible, I have hesitated to make the Gestapo and Nazi comparisons as I've talked about what we're experiencing. But I have to say, seeing people from all over the world, including Germany, looking at what's happening here, expressing genuine alarm and concern, and regularly making those comparisons is, I guess, kind of validating for us. I think many of us here have been feeling like this is what it must have felt like in 1930s Germany. I've been one of many people who have reposted some of Anne Frank's words too, like these ones. This is from her diary. Terrible things are happening outside. At any time of night and day, poor, helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared. That's again, I'm a little emotional because that is literally what we've been experiencing here. But that is written by Anne Frank in The Diary of a Young Girl. After reading this book in 8th grade, I don't think I would have ever imagined that I could read these words again and have them actually apply, quite literally, to the reality I was living in. But here we are, having people all around the world recognize this resonance feels strangely comforting, like we're already building the worldwide groundswell of community care and solidarity that will be needed to defeat today's fascism. And for this post, I want to leave you with some words to sit with. On the day Renee Good was murdered, and the trauma of it all washed over every one of us here in Minneapolis, I felt like I wanted to reach out to my community on Facebook, which, by the way, you can follow me there too. I often post things there to say at least something. But words just were not coming, which you may guess is fairly unusual for me. And then suddenly I realized I had the words. Today in Minneapolis has been horrifying, seems like an understatement. As I sit here contemplating it all and wanting to say at least something about it to all of you here, I realized that I didn't need any new words. The perfect ones already existed and have for a long, long time. Here they are, lightly edited for our modern, multicultural ears. Blessed are the humble in spirit, for theirs is the ultimate love we all seek. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who prioritize their communities, for they will inherit everything that matters. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will find love and joy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of the light. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for they are dedicating their lives to what really matters. But woe to you who are rich and powerful, for you have already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now and don't help others, for the deepest hungers within you will never be satiated. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when you are popular now, for throughout history, those are the ones who fall. I invite you to sit with these words. Let them wash over you. Let their meaning come alive in you today and tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that one, because they do really seem to inform this collective moment we're in.
If you'd like to engage in this conversation with the For the Love of Humanity podcast community, you can leave a message by texting or calling 1-612-440-4819. That's 1-612-440-4819. Keep your message as concise as you can, especially if you'd like it shared on the air. And be sure to indicate in your message whether you're cool with us airing it publicly with your first name. Otherwise, we can air it anonymously too. And remember, you can either call and leave a voice message or you can text. Either one works. And let us know your preference about sharing, whether with your name or anonymously. I really hope to engage in conversation with you this way, so please do call or text. That's 1-612-440-4819.
Okay, so that was January 16th, as I said. The next part of this story is from what I posted on January 23rd, 2026. Friends, life is intense here in Minneapolis. I've heard so many of my neighbors and friends say that it's so much worse than it looks on social media or on the news. So know that, and know that I feel Minneapolis rising up. Today, I've heard so many of my fellow Minnesotans say that they've never felt so hopeful. Why today? Because today is a day of truth and freedom. No work, no school, no shopping here. Or the first general strike in Minnesota in nearly 100 years. Hundreds of local businesses shut down. Tens of thousands, some estimates were saying over 100,000, marched through downtown Minneapolis this afternoon. And that was in temperatures that were many degrees below zero. Hundreds of clergy flew in from all over the country in solidarity, and they began their day shutting down the international airport known as MSP. Dozens of these clergy were arrested as they kneeled and prayed. They were zip-tied and herded into waiting buses, then charged with misdemeanors. Like I've said since all of this started, Minnesotans aren't playing around. So many of us have decided, no more. We are done. We are not going to keep participating in this dystopian nightmare anymore. We're going to do something different here. And so we are. None of this is exactly new in Minnesota. For generations, Minnesota has moved with a distinctive collective spirit. Civic engagement has always been robust. Voter turnout is usually the highest in the nation. The community of nonprofits is one of the most extensive and vibrant, too. Our legendary winters have created an unspoken understanding. If you see a car stuck in the snow or ice, you help shovel and or push them out. It's just what you do. Or in other words, ice is something we're used to collaboratively thwarting. Communicating this vibe can be tough, though, to help those who aren't from here understand it if they haven't experienced it. So take this as an example. This is a post from a neighbor named Liz. She says, "Y'all, I just stopped by the memorial for Renee Nicole Good on the way home from the giant march. I was just there to briefly pay my respects, and in those 10 minutes, I met the neighbors who live in the apartment building right next to the memorial. They've been posted up for 2 weeks straight, keeping watch with a fire pit. One lady brought a whole truckload of firewood to donate, and more neighbors helped unload. A Somali mama brought us delicious hot chai all the way from Woodbury. Street medics rocked up with mini med kits to give away and then went off to go get burgers for the crew manning the fire pit. All in just 10 minutes at the memorial. Well, it's negative 10 degrees out, y'all. I hecking love Minneapolis, this community. This is why we're going to win. This is the vibe. And here's the thing. We're not perfect, obviously. Folks say the racism here is way more nuanced and under the surface than it is in, say, Alabama. Y'all know we've had our share of police brutality here. Y'all may have heard all of the accolades and superlatives, best of this or that Minnesota has earned over the years. And the addendum that those of us who care about these things always attach to those stories is this one. For white folks, right? Because it is best of this or that, always for white folks, because the disparities here are always so intense that that's never true for those who aren't white. And still, because of the community mindedness that just seems to be baked in here, because people here really try to do the right thing most of the time, because our state has indeed welcomed many refugees and immigrants over the decades, and thus now has the highest Somali population and the second highest Hmong population in the United States, And because we celebrate and deeply appreciate our wealth of diverse cultures here, and because we've always prioritized the arts and education here, and because of so many other reasons, I'm sure, we were the wrong state to try. Over the last decade plus, especially, networks of mutual aid and collective care have gradually been woven and developed. Those all got a steroidal growth dose in 2020 during the global uprising for racial justice, whose epicenter was here in South Minneapolis, at the corner of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue, where George Floyd was slowly, dispassionately murdered by the MPD. And since 2020, new life and urgency have been simmering and growing. We've been seeding and growing relationships. We've been getting smarter. We've become ever more strategic. We're definitely more connected. Think of this like a pot of stew cooking. Over the past many years, we've been gathering and washing and chopping up all of the vegetables, gathering all the rest of the ingredients, putting everything in a giant pot, starting a simmer, and beginning to stir it all together. Then a collective threat came to town. A violent, impetuous, hateful, poorly trained cadre of agents here to harm and disappear our neighbors. And the flame under the pot was cranked to high heat. Now, the stew is reaching the potential it's held all along. Complementary flavors melding into beautiful symphonies, spices bringing out the most beautiful notes, what had all been separate ingredients becoming one big pot of delicious, nutritious, hearty stew that could nourish us all in a way we've never been before. Ask any of us here how we're doing, and I can almost guarantee you that you'll get two distinct answers, probably one right after the other. First, I'm struggling. We're struggling. This is rough. This is hard. So hard. And two, I am getting so much joy from seeing my community rise up and thrive together. Friends, here's the thing. As you can see, our ability to do this didn't arise on the spot. We've been growing it week after week, month after month, year after year. We've been preparing all of the ingredients one by one and gradually starting to throw them all in together. We have a lot of folks primed to jump in and participate in the cooking, even if they feel like they don't really know what they're doing. The extra fire lit under us all right now has been just what we needed to get all of these ingredients to start really cooking. And I'm astounded at the results. As I wrote last week, we're essentially a ragtag bunch of volunteers, ones with other day jobs, fully thwarting a multi-billion-dollar army outfitted with every kind of legit weapon. How? What do we have that they don't? What indeed? We have love. We have community. We have collective care. We're not playing here. This isn't a game for us. We truly care for our neighbors. We're actively incensed when we see one of them murdered by our government. We will not stand by while other neighbors are kidnapped and disappeared off our streets. We are not letting this happen. No way, no how. We are claiming our power. We are coming together. and we are on a roll. So, if you're not here and this is inspiring to you, don't just sit there being inspired. Do something. Claim your power. What ingredients can you start gathering? Who can help you cook? And how soon can you get your stew on that stovetop and start turning on the heat? For this post, here's another thing for you to reflect on, something to practice, a way to actually engage with what it's about. Remember that community is a practice. What does that mean? You can't just gather a group of people in a space and call them a community. You also can't grow community for a while, then stop paying attention to it and assume that the community will persist. You also can't leave it up to others, because a community requires every single human present to be present, really present. So, what ingredient or ingredients can you start preparing now? Even if where you are isn't experiencing this kind of trauma, now's the time to start creating the community that will support you when and if you have to experience it. So 3 ideas on that front. Who can you reach out to that you've been wanting to know better? Text or email or call them and set up a conversation over a warm drink. Okay, and number 2, have you noticed something that's missing where you live? Something that would make life better for you and everyone else there? Gather at least one other person, ideally several people, and tell them about your idea. Brainstorm together. Start figuring out how you could make it happen together. And number 3, what is a talent you have that you don't often share with others? Maybe you bake the most amazing something, or you sing the most spine-chilling song, or you write, or you cook, you knit, you what? Write down a list of your talents, especially those that you don't usually share with others. Then figure out how you can start sharing at least one of those with your neighbors. These are just some ideas. You can do other things too, but the point is, get started. One step, then the next. And before you know it, your stew will be cooking. This post is now in February, actually the very end of the month, February 27th, 2026. There has been a crisis here, and it has been acute, and the whole world seemed to be paying attention. Now, when all of the national and international media teams have long left, and official statements would have you believe that things are getting, quote, back to normal, I'm here to tell you they're not. And that enough dominoes have fallen because of the weeks-long violent invasion we've been enduring, that this crisis is now a slow-moving economic tsunami approaching the shore. We need urgent help. Yesterday would have been best, but today works. And if too many days pass without any help, I don't even want to imagine how bad it'll be. Do y'all remember my amazing friend Ashley, who built the Stand with Minnesota website to help direct philanthropic support to Minnesota during our most recent traumatic stretch? Ashley has a brilliant way of putting her finger right on the pulse of the zeitgeist and knowing what is needed in a given moment in time. Having moved away from Minnesota and watching her home community struggle from afar, she did what she does best. She designed, she created, she communicated, and a website helping direct people all around the world who saw the images and videos and stories coming out of Minnesota and who wanted to help our communities was born. This is philanthropy, pure philanthropy, love in motion. And the result of her love in motion, by some accounting, nearly $20 million has already been raised through her website in just over a month. And I'm sure that's just a portion of the philanthropy she has mobilized. People all over the world saw the giant bat signal she sent out, an effort to, quote, point the fire hose of people's generosity in the right direction, end quote. Those were her words. Mission accomplished, I'd say. Beyond all the money raised, she caught the Guardian's attention. You know, that little paper over in the UK, which inspired a story they published this past Tuesday, February 24th, an excerpt from thousands of miles away in San Antonio. Ashley Fairbanks watched the news pour out of her hometown of Minneapolis. Federal immigration authorities flooding the streets, and regular people stepping up to defend and care for their communities. She knew she had to do something. So the 39-year-old writer, artist, and digital strategist started a Google Doc. Soon, the list of resources for residents grew so long it became unwieldy, and Fairbanks, who builds websites for a living, launched Stand with Minnesota. Immediately, she said, people were really eager to help. Since its launch, the site has received over 2.4 million hits and helped raise almost 20 million for affected Minnesotans, she said. That's the end of the excerpt from The Guardian. Listen, she didn't start with a website. She didn't start with raising money. She started with love. Love for her hometown. Love for the people in her hometown. Love for the vibrant community she had built here over many years. So she couldn't just stand by and watch this community struggle. She had to help. So she did what she knew how to do best. And it ended up being astoundingly impactful. Something relatively simple for her had the power to seriously change the world and people's actual lives for the better. Amazingly inspiring, right? But here's the problem. Even despite all of the philanthropic support that has been mobilized, both monetary and in many other forms, Minnesotans are facing down an approaching massive economic tsunami that threatens to take out our communities even more than the siege of armed, masked, violent, chaotic government agents on our streets has. For weeks, even months now, we Minnesotans have been in rapid response mode, on high alert, rushing from one emergency to another, doing everything we can to just survive one of the most traumatic strings of days any of us could have imagined. And that reality, that means that so-called normal life has been kaput for weeks or months now, which means that none of the usual things have been able to happen. People haven't been able to leave their homes, which means they haven't been able to work. which means they haven't been able to afford or even shop for food, which also means there is no way they can pay their rent right now. Plus, businesses are struggling because they haven't had staff and they haven't had customers, and revenue and sales have all but dried up. So, in addition to a looming crisis for the local economy of permanently shut down restaurants and body shops and corner stores and salons, we are facing a looming eviction crisis. All of the above is seriously alarming. But the looming eviction crisis is the most acute problem right now. March 1st is Sunday. Rent is due, and we don't have enough funds flowing into Minneapolis's communities to prevent a rolling wave of evictions. Here are Ashley's own words on Facebook a couple days ago. I am just completely dumbstruck by how little any foundations or large nonprofits or wealthy people have given towards rent in Minnesota right now. Rent is due in 3 days. Thousands of families impacted by the ICE occupation are at risk for eviction. And yet, it's mostly the volunteers at rent funds doing the heavy lifting of keeping people housed, and their resources are either depleted or quickly diminishing. I sit here and wonder, do people not understand what it means to be evicted? Do they not understand the urgency of this moment of keeping people housed? This is a solvable problem, but government and foundations have not presented any solutions, and they have frequently treated us like the solutions we have presented aren't good enough. Why are teachers, social workers, even elected officials looking to volunteers at rent funds for help? Why are my broke friends paying more people's rent than government is? I'm honestly terrified at the nonchalance of people who control the purse strings and the cascading impacts of thousands of families entering homelessness in a time when there are no available family shelter beds. The costs of rehousing these families after they are evicted is exponentially higher than just paying the rent now. Not to mention the barriers of having an eviction on your record and the trauma, especially for children, of being displaced. Yet, despite all the wealth in Minnesota, all the large corporations and foundations, no one has stepped forward and said to the rent funds who already have the infrastructure to distribute money, here is the money you need. Foundations and corporations have billions of dollars, and they could solve this problem with $20 million. I am talking to more than a dozen rent funds, and none of them has received any kind of philanthropic support over $100,000. And most have received none at all. Crowdfunding donations have slowed to a crawl. Our networks are tapped. And we still have to receive the emails, calls, texts, requests from families and social service providers that are desperate. I don't even know what doors to beg at anymore. I am tired. The people running these rent funds are tired, but we aren't willing to turn away. Anyone know any millionaires? That's the end of Ashley's post. Here we have a story much like that of the so-called widow's mite in the Bible, where a poor widow sacrifices all she has, 2 tiny copper coins or lepta, into the temple treasury. And then the wise spiritual teacher, Jesus, praises her, noting she gave more than the wealthy because she gave from her need, not her surplus. This feels very apt for what's happening here. We've had the people of Minneapolis giving all they can for weeks now, giving all they can, perhaps from funds they used to use for going out to eat or other entertainment, sacrificing some of their own needs to help their neighbors meet their needs, emptying their savings to make sure their community can survive. And it's still not enough to meet the need. Meanwhile, individuals and organizations sitting on literally billions worth of capital, people for whom meeting the actual monetary need in Minneapolis would probably seem like a drop in the bucket to them, are giving next to nothing. Do you see the irony? That these wealthy individuals and massive organizations like to say that they practice philanthropy. They don't actually practice philanthropy unless, like Ashley and so many other Minnesotans, they see an urgent need and they let love move them to give, to help, to do whatever it takes to make sure their community is okay. They need to let love move them. Ashley has given whatever it took. Ordinary Minnesotans have been giving whatever it has taken. Where are the people who can move money on the massive scale that's needed right now? They're desperately needed. And if they don't move right now, I don't even want to imagine how bad it'll be. Okay, as the last chapter of this dispatch from Minneapolis, Minnesota, I'm going to share what I published last week on Friday, March 13th, 2026, when, by the way, not much had changed from that last post I shared from February. We know philanthropy. This is who we humans are. Gather a group of us together, consciously cultivate a culture of care and solidarity where everyone knows that they're not alone, that if they need help, their people will show up for them. Then leave us to live alongside each other and watch the magic happen. When humans gather together and care about each other and work together to prioritize their collective well-being, gathering resources for the good of all is a natural result of their relationships with each other. We can't help ourselves. This is what we do when we're grounded in our own humanity and unwilling to dehumanize any of the other humans around us. The roots of the word philanthropy are Greek. Philos, meaning love, think Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and anthropos, meaning humanity. Think anthropology or the scientific study of humanity. So yes, philanthropy means love of humanity. And yet, the way our dominant culture has grown to use this word is not that. Typically these days, philanthropy means big money, fancy galas, elitism, power hoarding, generational wealth, names on buildings, massive endowments invested in a corporate stock market that extracts value from humanity and the natural world rather than funding them or protecting them. An industry full of credentials and career tracks and ever-developing proximity to power, logic models, best practices, top-down decision-making, donors prioritizing what gets funded versus givers responding to community needs and requests. I could go on, but I hope you can see how far what we currently understand as philanthropy is from a true philanthropy. Having worked within this field of professionalized philanthropy for nearly 2 decades and repeatedly seen the many gnarly dynamics I've named here, I can't tell you how good it's been for my heart to live in Minneapolis over the past weeks and to see how my neighbors are responding to a shock and awe, violent occupation by caring for each other. We could have turned on each other. We could have looked out for number one. We could have minded our own business. But did we do those things? No. We showed up for each other. We put our bodies on the line. We bought and delivered food for each other. We did each other's laundry. We looked out for each other. We blew whistles to keep each other safe. We helped each other pay rent. We gave each other rides. We sang with each other. We gathered for potlucks. We grew stronger relationships. We loved each other again and again. And while the regular citizens of Minnesota actively, powerfully practice philanthropy in these ways, what did the industry we've called philanthropy for decades do? Next to nothing. We've had a situation where the official leadership has failed to lead. Corporate philanthropy, in the form of much-needed financial support, was not only non-existent, but those philanthropies' parent corporations said absolutely nothing for weeks in response to their home communities being violently occupied and terrorized. They even allowed their properties to be used by the occupiers and their own employees to be kidnapped and assaulted. And then, when they finally put out a statement, it was so late and milquetoast as to be absolutely meaningless. Institutional philanthropy barely gave a squeak. The Minneapolis Foundation has responded by distributing over $1.8 million to nonprofits for food and housing assistance, which is of course needed, but is a drop in the bucket of the vast need. Additionally, they mobilized $3.5 million to create an economic response fund to support small businesses, particularly those with immigrant owners facing severe disruptions and revenue loss, which again is needed, but is nowhere near as much as is needed. The other major local community foundation, the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation, might have announced some support, but even being a professional in this world, I don't remember what it was. And in a cursory search while writing this, I couldn't even find any record of it. The Women's Foundation has an immigrant rapid response fund, which granted $5.7 million to 54 organizations. They say that another $4 million in donations from around the globe will continue to be granted until all funds are distributed. Again, that's great, and it barely puts a dent in the need. Other foundations mobilized funds in smaller amounts or for specific purposes, but none of the mobilization has been at the enormous scale of capital needed, and that, frankly, these organizations are all sitting on in the form of endowments full of stock market and other investments. They're just sitting on it. It's there. They're just not moving it. Meanwhile, the government response has been anemic. No aid from the governor, despite weeks of pleas from residents. No aid from the legislature or Senate, who are deep into this year's session now, focused on having committee meetings and meeting with constituents, and thus they won't take any real action for weeks. And our city government? Oh boy. Minneapolis has estimated that in 1 month alone, while up to 3,000 federal immigration enforcement agents invaded our neighborhoods, the city experienced at least 203.1 million in losses. That's in 1 month. And that total represents losses to the economy, livelihoods, neighbors' mental health, and to food and shelter security. In response, just this week, the mayor vetoed an ordinance passed by the city council that would have given tenants 60 days notice before eviction, an extension of the usual 30 days. This ordinance was meant to give us Minneapolitans more time to fundraise for our neighbors' outstanding rent, something we've now been successfully doing for months for many, many families. Landlords would still have gotten paid. They would have just had to wait a bit longer. And yet, the mayor, who recently made a victory tour across nationwide media, decided to hasten evictions for the families we haven't been able to help yet. And then he suggested $1 million in rent relief as his alternative to the eviction delay. That's on top of the $1 million the city council had already allocated. That's the amount that they allocated, $2 million. This is the city's response, while, according to the University of Minnesota's Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, Minnesota is facing an excess rent debt of $27.4 to $51.3 million after the federal occupation. Make it make sense. These are the people who can move millions, billions even. These are the people who have access to the most capital that could easily vanquish the needs. These are the people who could be collaborating with each other, organizing funding and relief, responding to the needs their communities share with them, just like we all have been, just the regular people. Instead, they are slowly moving peanuts. Meanwhile, in my world of neighbors helping neighbors, the movement is swift, responsive, and even massive. A friend just posted this on Facebook. We've prevented evictions, supported families who have been torn apart because of racism and a dark, terrible narrative. Some families are slowly returning to work. Others aren't ready. Their job is gone, or the person who shared their rent costs is gone. We're about to kick off our fundraising for April, where we'll be prioritizing families who have eviction orders and families who've lost someone to detainment and deportation. Donate here if you can. And then she shared this amazing graphic, which says transparency post. And then it says total funds paid since January 15th, $820,000, 529. Can you believe that? Total families served in February, 365, March, 320. And then 130 families are still needing support. And the figure on the image is $214,000 and 457, which is the funds that are still needed for March rent. And that sounds like a lot, and it is. It's amazing. Again, these are just regular people doing this. And even more amazing is that that is just one of many, many such efforts by neighbors around the Twin Cities and the whole of Minnesota. If you want a sense of the scale of the mutual aid effort, you can go to the Stand with Minnesota website, scroll through, and you'll see the list of rent fund after rent fund, all inspiring examples of regular neighbors stepping up to keep their neighbors housed by digging into their own income and or savings and asking the same of their other neighbors, friends, and family. By now, there's likely been well over 20 million raised via Stand With Minnesota by some very hard to make estimates that are probably grossly underestimating totals. Consider these results. Millions upon millions raised. Hundreds of school communities mobilizing to protect their kids. Neighborhoods mobilizing to keep their neighbors fed and housed. Community connections forged and strengthened. I can't help but think that I'm pretty sure I'm watching our collective definition of philanthropy transform before our very eyes in real time. I think us neighbors see it, but I'm wondering if the aforementioned institutions have realized it yet. Here's the truth. I think mutual aid like this is what philanthropy is actually about. We here in Minnesota have been calling this a leaderful movement, right? A movement full of leaders since the beginning of our response to the occupation. Because frankly, swiftly responding as we needed to emergent necessity, there was no time to wait for orders or direction from anybody. People just mobilized everywhere all at once. They gave what they could. They brought their unique talents to the table and contributed where those most made sense. Again and again, we reminded each other that you don't need to do everything. You just need to do something. Do what you're able to do. And if all of us do that, we should all be doing pretty well. Musicians made music. Cooks cooked. Writers wrote. Organizers organized. Artists made art. Those who had money gave it. Those who didn't gave so much else. And everywhere you looked, people were connecting with other people, organizing themselves into a force that was so formidable that it was able to take down a giant. I don't know where we go next. The future is unwritten. But we're all already talking and strategizing about how we continue to root into and grow the new ecosystemic philanthropy we've been seeding. We're going to keep giving. We're going to keep organizing. We're going to keep loving each other. And meanwhile, those institutions, the ones we used to think were, quote, the leaders or, quote, philanthropy, I don't know. I think they're quickly losing relevance. Maybe they should just spend down those endowments and huge pots of reserves, pouring all of that latent capital that has been just sitting there for generations, capital that was meant to move and help, into the communities that are already leading and that desperately need it. And they should then roll up their sleeves to help too. There are plenty leaders, let me tell you, there are plenty leaders waiting to invite them into the fold and give them a meaningful job to do, one that will actually help. Are they ready to leave their ivory towers and high perches and join in community with us? I sure hope so. Our final practice today is a simple one. Find a quiet place where you can hear your thoughts. Take 3 deep breaths into your belly and slowly blow them out through your lips as if you have a straw between them. Okay? So breathing in through your nose, deep into your belly, feeling your belly expand, and then slowly blow the air out through your lips as if you have a straw between them. At least 3 times. Get quiet within yourself, reflect, and ask yourself, what are my resources and talents? What are my resources and talents? What can I give to help others? Really reflect on that and write down the answers you get. Get your answers and then go do it.
Thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you're left with some inspiration, some things to ponder, some topics that will spur further conversation between you and your friends and colleagues. If you'd like to engage in this conversation with the For the Love of Humanity podcast community, you can leave a message by texting or calling 1-612-440-4819. That's 1-612-440-4819. Be sure to indicate whether you're cool with your thoughts being shared on the air. Then, want to help us spread the word? Don't forget to follow and rate and review the pod wherever you get your podcasts. That'll help more people find us and help our community grow. Finally, visit the online community at fortheloveofhumanity.community and be sure to subscribe when you're there. Bye for now, friends.